It has come to my attention that 1000 hertz polling rate was the gold standard and has been for several years. Unfortunately, that has changed because mice nowadays can do higher polling rates. But you may ask yourself, everything's fine. My setup is perfectly fine. I don't really have any problems with competing online with my mouse. I don't really need to upgrade or think that there's something better when everything's perfectly fine based on how I do things. And that may be true. However, I'm pretty sure that you've always found certain individuals you've always had difficulty with that you could not easily take out unless you cheesed it a little bit, hide behind cover, glitch them. You had to cheese it a little bit, but facing them one-on-one, you would not win. You may not be thinking about that now, but I'm pretty sure you will think about it after a match that you either barely won or lost due to that opponent or opponents who seem to always be able to aim down sight faster, shoot you faster, get headshots faster, and you even think one or two things. Either they got better hardware or they're cheating. I have an answer for that. And that answer is very obvious, that even though you are accustomed to and comfortable with your setup for how you use your mouse pad, whether it be a slow pad or a fast pad, you just don't know how to fix the problem. You can go in and try to tweak settings and lower latency and all that good stuff. But the ultimate problem is you and how you are using your peripherals. In this example, I'm going to show you why you should invest in a mouse that gives you a higher polling rate other than 1000. Preferably, it seems that the sensors that are being used in today's mouse offer polling rates of up to 8000. So there's no going to just 2000, there's no going to just 4000. 90% of this is based on the sensor of the mouse. The mouse sensor has to be capable of operating and reporting information so that you can control that cursor or in game that reticle to aim exactly where you want it to, but do so at a lower latency to allow you to be competitive with that very opponent who's doing it much faster than you. I will give an example here. As you can see, within a certain time frame, 1000 hertz will give you 16 polling reports. At 8000, it gives you 128 polling reports. And if you do the math, you can find out what it is at 4000. But the general gist is the more polling reports that you can produce and be registered on your computer, the better and faster you'll be able to acquire a target and be more competitive. Now, here's another example. It shows you that, and let's read it. And one of the most popular real-world latency measurement graphs, end-to-end latency clicks right here shows you. At 1000 hertz, you can see the latency for 1 millisecond. And you can see the latency at 0.25 milliseconds, how much movement you can get registered. And at 8000, you can see how much movement gets registered within that interval as well. I can give you all the technical specs of it, but it's not going to register as to how does this relate to being able to use the mouse and be more competitive in gaming. It's great that 4000 gives you 0.125 milliseconds. At worst, 0.2 to 0.3. So in that frame, it doesn't really tell you anything. But what the most important part is that the higher you go in DPI, the more you can saturate the polling rate. And the more you saturate the polling rate, the more the polling rate becomes a bottleneck. Using 1600 DPI completely saturates the polling rate, which creates a higher deviation. So I'm giving you technical stuff. Okay, well, what does that mean? And I'll show you one of Battle Nonsense's graphs in a second, but I want to show you this. I'm going to pull this up. I'm going to go to 32. I'm at 32 DPI. As you can see here, I do not slow down the mouse pointer because I'm in complete control of this and it feels comfortable for me and I'm able to get to where I would need to get to. I'm using 3200 DPI, but I'm using 4000 hertz polling rate. That feels the most comfortable to me to move this mouse around and not feel like that it has some sort of acceleration. It's like acceleration feel when you have one of those mouse that has a sensor that really can't control that speed. So if I'm going real fast, I can control the circle. You see me control the circle? I can make it big. I can try to make it small. So let's make it small. That's a better demonstration. You see I'm more consistent with it small, right? Now, if it gets bigger, that's the deviation. That's the deviation. Now, if I go to 1000 hertz, I'm going to try to make it small. But as I make it small, as you can see, it gets bigger. And that's not me doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to make it small. But the mouse has a tendency to, and I'm stopped because my hand's getting tired. It has a higher deviation at faster movements than at 4,000, which is more consistent. Now it does deviate, but not as much. Because as you can see, I'm going really fast. Go to 1,000, it's not going to be as fast, let's see, but it has a tendency to deviate more. So that means that more often than not, you're not reaching the target latency of the mouse at 1,000 hertz as you are at 4,000 hertz. I hope that demonstration clarifies the reason why you want to go to a higher DPI, but also has a mouse that has a higher polling rate. Let's look at Battle Nonsense graph. He shows that at 1600 DPI, 1000 hertz polling rate, there is a deviation of 16.75 to 3.11. This is the most important part of this graph, not so much the medium, because there's no exact way to know how often you're reaching that medium of 8.08. There's just no information to how to achieve that. So the most important part of this graph is knowing that you can average between 16.75, and that is, I'm assuming this was done as a result of how fast or how flicky your mouse movement was versus how slow and precise your movement are at 311. When you're playing first-person shooter games online, it can either be fast because someone showed up on your screen all of a sudden, or real slow because you're sneaking up on somebody. But this is the deviation. Now, here's the important part. He increased the DPI to 32, which is double. And look at the results. Exactly the same. It's margin of error. This is complete margin of error. Margin of error. Margin of error. Margin of error. Margin of It's exactly the same. So increasing the DPI to 3200 shows that you've saturated the polling rate, and now the polling rate is a bottleneck. Now, how do I know this? Because I'm going to show you in a minute what happens when you relieve the strain of the restriction of the polling rate and increase the polling rate. We're going to go to 8,000. Wish he did 2,000, wish he did 4,000, but he didn't. He went right to 8,000. At 1,600, you go from a deviation of 16.75 to 8.33. Half the deviation. The medium is 4 something, but I'm gonna ignore that. It's half. That's not important. So you can have a deviation between 8.3 to 2.17. That's a lot better than going from 16.75 to 3.11. The important part of this graph is the deviation, not the medium, because that is what typically happens when you use your mouse in a competitive game. When you increase the DPI to saturate that polling rate, look at what happens. Oh my goodness. You now have a deviation as high as 5.40, which is still lower than the medium of 1000 hertz polling rate to 1.5. Look at that. No matter your worst case scenario doing this, it's always going to be better than at 1000 hertz. I use 4000 hertz. I can't give you the exact numbers, but I know somewhere right here. Polling rate at 1600 DPI, because it's going to be 32 and 4. So that means it's going to be somewhere right in here, which would be great, which is going to be a lot better than what it is right here. And it's not going to be 10 or 11. It's going to be like maybe 9. Somewhere around 9 and somewhere around 2.8, something like that. It's very minuscule going between 4,000 polling rate and 8,000 polling rate. So this is what I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you that you can control 3200 DPI with a decent controllable mouse pad and a better mouse that has a better sensor. Now, in the research I've done, it does tell you that typical pattern on good sensors are the PMW3395, 3389, 3950, they're called the Superlight series, etc., which will give you that ability to control your mouse. Now, this one here is mouse clicks. Although related, that's not the subject I want to get into, because mouse clicks is going to depend on the actual sensor used on the mouse itself for the buttons, and that's going to vary based on the mouse itself. And it shows you some examples here between the Viper Razor, the Asus, the Logitech, etc. It all depends. Some have very good sensors for movement, but horrible buttons for latency. You have to know what to buy. So I do thank you for your time. Have a nice day.